You are listening to episode 7 of the Beyond Unreal podcast. I am the White Dragon.
And here is Sir Briz.
Let's get into a couple of community things first. Last week we had the UT3 server got set up. This week Flax set up a TeamSpeak server. It hasn't really gotten a whole lot of use yet, but I am idling in there almost every day. So if you want to come and talk to me, if you love yelling at me so much on the forum, you can come and yell at me in TeamSpeak. I'll be there. Let's talk about the commits. So there was kind of all of the commits were kind of towards the end of the week this time.
Yep. Monday and Tuesday especially, there was nothing.
There was nothing until Wednesday.
Yeah.
Some of the big ones, they added a bio rifle, which came from the community. That was a pull request. They added a sniper, which is kind of interesting. The effect on the sniper leaves this huge smoke trail from where you are, and then afterwards steam rises from the barrel. Mm-hmm. So kind of an interesting implementation of some of the things that they had in 2004 and UT3 to show where the shot was coming from.
Yep. And they also added mutators this week.
I haven't been able to actually use them, but supposedly there's mutators in there and you can play with low graph now.
Yep.
And tons of visual effects.
Yep. Textures, particle effects. They added textures to some of the maps.
Yes. So one of the big ones, if you go and look at Deck now, Deck has textures and they kind of outline a lot of the catwalks now, which was kind of interesting because it looks like that they're really trying to take some of the things people have been saying about the visual clarity. They also added a map. It's F08, which is so cool looking. I mean, it's just concrete and lights, but it looks so slick. I can't wait to see what happens when they start putting some of the visual effects in there. They haven't really changed much with the movement this week, but there has been a lot of discussion. And Steve did come out and talk about where they're going to be going with the movement. And it sounds like he wants to nail down some of the properties that he has in his prototype right now.
This week I talked to Jim Brown a little bit about where they stand on movement right now and coming up with real world translations from the UT movement basically to UT4. He gave me a bunch of values that they've been working with. Internally, they've been tweaking the movement themselves and seeing what kinds of things they like. They had come up with values for a whole bunch of things like movement speed and dodge height and the acceleration and deceleration and all that kind of stuff. So they've been tweaking the movement while people have been talking about it in the forums. So hopefully within the next few days, we'll see Steve commit some changes to his movement prototype that will bring the numbers more in line with what they've been testing with.
Yeah, and he said that, once they get some of those numbers out, then they'll start looking back again at the mechanics, which I think is the right way to go. I remember talking about last week where I said, once you have the right movement speed, some of these mechanics aren't going to make sense. They're going to be silly or... Yeah, I also remember saying, nothing is out yet.
Yep.
And he pretty much confirmed that now. So, and it's not really fair to discard a particular movement mechanic when the actual properties of that mechanic aren't even set.
Right.
So, there was a lot of talk about the slide, and Nick's slide is still in there, but what he has in the slide right now, to me, would just never work.
Yeah.
And so they're going to need to have a chance to tweak some of those values before we can give our final judgment on it. In their live stream, they talked about some of the weapons again.
Yep.
So they talked about some specific weapons that they've always felt like they never quite got right and they want the community specifically to look at. The first one was the bio rifle, which... bio rifle has been pretty much the same in all of the games, but it sounds like they actually kind of want to change it.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, in each game it had slight balance differences.
Yes.
Like in UT3, the glob was quite a bit larger, and it stuck to people a lot easier. And when it stuck to people, it would kind of damage them for a second and then explode and kill them.
You had more time after being hit with the goo to react.
Right. But mostly you just had enough time to perhaps
kill the guy that just killed you.
That just caused you to die, unless you were lucky enough to have enough health and shields to survive, which you basically had to have
full health,
a keg, and a shield belt to survive the maximum possible damage of a goo glob.
I think maybe part of the reason why they're wondering if there are things that can change is because the primary and secondary fire are pretty much do the same thing.
Yeah,
it's just that the primary fire is designed for rapid fire, which really doesn't get used all that much.
Yeah.
And the second fire is for the loading up, which is pretty much the only reason that it's used.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that that's really where the problem lies, and that they want to provide more utility out of it, because right now it really is just I load it up and hit somebody with it, and then if I miss, I switch over to a real weapon and try and finish them off.
Yeah, in fact, just like in previous UTs, you can grab the bio rifle and charge it up, and then hit the button to switch to another weapon, and it'll hold you in that position. You can hit somebody with it and have you,
and it will automatically switch
to the other weapon. You know, because it drops a mine basically on the ground, that limits the mobility of the person that you're fighting with. So if they don't want to hit it, they've got a limited, more confined space that they can work within. It's really a gun that's designed for map control and confining your opponent to specific areas during combat situation, whatever that is.
Well, and it's very important going the other way too. So if you're in a 1v1 and you just died and the other guy got the shield belt, the bio rifle is like your only hope, really. In some cases.
Yeah, to break that. So let's talk about the bio rifle that they merged.
Mm-hmm.
So in this specific bio rifle, the sludge can drip, basically. That's one of the notable things about it. Because it can drip, it kind of stretches down from ceilings. And what are your thoughts on...
You know, they keep talking about it as a trap. And the problem with that is that nobody intentionally walks into goo.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to see.
And I think the other part of that, too, is that with previous UT games, if you shot goo, it would explode.
Yeah.
And so most people, when they would see goo just sitting on the ground that they didn't know where it came from, they would just shoot it to get rid of it.
Yep.
And the other part of that, too, is I don't think anyone intentionally uses it as a trap in terms of I'm going to lay a trap and then leave and go somewhere else.
Somebody, I tricked somebody into walking into it.
Yeah, it's more about dropping the goo next to someone's position that you currently know and using that to either confine where they are or hope that they run into it. So I played on a server the other day that was bio rifles only. We played on a port of Inox. So there was low gravity. The whole thing with the goo is just getting it close to somebody so that they run over it. And people were running over goo globs left and right in that level. And I think that's kind of what you do with goo. You try to get it close to somebody so they might accidentally hit it. But most of it is trying to confine where people are or nail them with it and get them to take that huge chunk of damage.
So let's go on to the minigun, your favorite weapon.
Yes.
So what's wrong with the secondary fire of the minigun?
Okay, I have to explain my biases first a little bit because I hated the minigun in 2K3 and 2K4.
Oh man.
Especially in 2K3, that thing had lockdown like you wouldn't believe, and you could not move out of the way fast enough. That thing, like anybody who got you cornered with that thing, you were toast. Even with the fast weapon switching, you could not switch to anything fast enough to get rid of the person that was shooting at you. And if you were somehow lucky enough to avoid it, you came out of it with so little health that anybody on the map could take you down. I hated that thing.
Yeah, well, and that was compounded by the fact that there was a shield gun. So it was like you had to use the shield gun. Because I remember in CTF when I was playing with Frag System on the ladders, and when somebody took our flag, it was basically like all 5 guys on the team pulled out their miniguns.
You had to pull up your shield gun and just pray that it would block enough of the spray of those things to keep you moving. It was ridiculous, okay? And in 2K4, it really didn't improve that much. Like, okay, so they got rid of the lockdown factor.
But you couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, it was still, like, there was no escaping it. Anyway, moving on. So that kind of explains where I came from with the minigun. So in UT3, when they introduced the Stinger minigun, I really liked it because the alternate fire was interesting. I don't think that there's anything quite as cool as nailing the person that you're fighting to the wall with the last Stinger shard that kills them.
Yeah.
And they just go ragdoll stuck into the wall. Okay, that's just pretty cool. And the other thing is that it does a lot of damage, and so if you're good at leading your shots on people that are moving, you can get into a position where you're just pounding them with this high damage shard that's a projectile and adds a level of skill to killing somebody with that alternate fire. Now the primary fire I'm still a little unsure on.
I think one of the big things about all of the miniguns since UT99, even though they really annoyed us, they weren't necessarily effective either.
Yeah.
You know, especially in UT 2004, it was basically used as a finishing weapon. So if somebody only had 20 health left, that's when you would pull out the minigun.
Yeah.
Because the consistent damage was worth it.
Right.
And that none of the games since UT99 really had the high damage output mode. In UT99, when you pulled out that secondary fire on there and you had a decent ping, you were going to pwn anything.
Yeah.
Because it just put out so much damage, you died so fast from it, and there was no real way to get away from it.
Yeah.
In UT3, they really tried to make it useful.
Yeah.
It was one of the better balance changes in UT3. The Stinger was actually useful, but at the same time, the secondary fire was really hard to use. And even though it was really cool and there was some nice things about it, it really wasn't utilized to its fullest extent.
Really, most people didn't pull out the Stinger and start shooting the alt fire. It just wasn't something that people did. Like, I did it because I got some kind of sadistic satisfaction out of using it, but it wasn't because it was terribly effective. It was more just because I appreciated the mechanic. If you evaluate that mechanic, what you find is, you know, the shards shoot pretty slow. It takes quite a while to get to somebody. So when you're using it effectively, you're usually not that far away from somebody. And if you have any other weapon, it's going to be far more effective than that Stinger alt fire is, and there's no reason whatsoever
with
to
rockets
use it.
are pretty much...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But you know why? I really feel like the issue with the minigun is that it's an instant hit weapon that does constant damage, and so the only way to get away from it is to hide behind a corner.
Yeah.
Now, there are certainly ways of fixing that, because there's a lot of games out there that use weapons like the minigun, and that's really all that their games are. But those games have recoil and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's a mechanic that we can look at, maybe not. I think it would be interesting, but I also think it would probably be a pretty big turnoff to a large portion of the user base. And then the last one they talked about was the impact hammer. It's another one of those instances where the primary fire and the secondary fire kind of do the same thing, but one of them does it better, and so they always just use the other one. In the impact hammer's case, it's just always better to charge it up.
There's never a reason to just do a quick shot. There's always some reason to have charged up the impact hammer, whether that's because if you bump into somebody, you're going to immediately kill them, or you're trying to do an impact hammer jump. That single charge shot is never going to give you the kind of accuracy that charging up a little bit and then jumping and boosting with it will give you. When they added things like the shield on the shield gun, and when they added like the power up, what is it? It's like an electromagnetic pulse basically. They realized that the firing modes were the same, and they were trying to come up with a mechanic that was good for the alt fire, but both of those mechanics have kind of serious flaws in the way that they affect the game.
Like with in UT3, this is another instance where it was a really cool idea, but it didn't really happen very often.
Yeah.
The impact hammer is really the utility weapon, so you could stick any kind of utility in there and see what happens.
I do think that they identified something in UT3 that is valuable. I mean, it didn't happen that often, but if there was a way to make it happen more often where you could knock the Berserk power up off of somebody or the U damage off of somebody and steal it from them, that would be pretty cool. The problem is that in UT, you don't tend to be able to get that so close to somebody. And if you do, you should be killing them. Like, in UT3, it was better to have the impact hammer charged up with the possibility that you'll kill them by bumping into them
rather than trying to
secondary. Yeah, because if you killed somebody with a power-up in UT3, they dropped it.
Yep.
And so there was never a reason to steal it. The purpose of stealing it went away when you could kill them and take it away from them. So anyway, all I'm saying is that there is a mechanic there that's worth exploring, but how you implement that kind of mechanic in a way that works in the UT style of game is probably different than putting it on the alt fire of the impact hammer.
So in their live stream, they also had a little spiff about the sniper.
Yeah.
So it was, if you go back and watch that video, watch Steve, because you could tell he was just squirming. He was so ready to expose DR Sin as a camper. And we all knew that he was a camper. Look, he is the worst camper I've ever seen. That's all he does. But the thing about the sniper versus the lightning gun,
yeah,
it was a pretty big point of contention in Unreal Tournament 2004.
Yep.
Both of them made it in.
Yeah, I mean, the sniper and the lightning gun are pretty much the same weapon, just with different models and different visual effects. I've said multiple times on the forums that I kind of prefer the lightning gun. I thought that it took the concept of a sniper rifle and turned it into something that fit with the rest of the arsenal.
Yes. And I think that the art style makes a big difference. You know, I could be completely wrong about this, but based on what I'm seeing in the art forum and some of the assets that they've actually put in the game, the art style is looking really slick, you know, and futuristic. Yeah. And so I think that the lightning gun would fit better in there.
Yeah.
When I'm playing it right now, when you pull that sniper up, it just doesn't fit. Now, it doesn't help that they haven't adjusted where it attaches to you yet, so it looks like you're holding it by, like, the buttstock or something like that. But I do like the visual style of it better. That being said, you're going to have both. Because face is not face without a sniper rifle. I'm sorry. And, you know, all of this stuff that Joe Wilcox was saying about, you know, it takes skill to take out a sniper that's hiding in the shadows. Well, first of all, it seems to me like that there's a lot more skill required to track that sniper down and kill him than it is to actually be that sniper that's camping. We should think about the skill that's required to kill rather than the skill that's required to not be killed.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter anyways, because in 2004 and in UT3, they both had tracers, and even though it wasn't like a huge beacon, it was more than enough for a decent player to see where you were coming from.
Yeah. So I started playing Unreal Deathmatch like way back, very beginning. And the thing that I still remember the most from back then was playing Tundra and people taking turns basically sniping from the tower in Tundra, and it kind of turned into a meta game in Tundra, who could survive the longest up in the tower sniping people before somebody would take them out and take their place. And if you think about it, Face is kind of the same kind of concept.
Yes.
Everybody knows that there's a crap load of snipers up there on the tower in Face. And so half the time when you spawn, you grab the sniper rifle and you start scanning the tower looking for your next victim up there to take out that's trying to pot shot everybody. Knowing where a person's sniping from tends to not be that hard.
I'm sure that the Epic employees are sitting there thinking about this and going, yeah, we always know where Joe is going to be, right?
Yeah, he thinks he's hiding real well. He's standing up there in the sniper roost, standing up there on top of the Face Tower, standing up there on the Citadel Tower, like, he thinks he's hiding.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of places on that tower that you can sit. I still never had a problem finding them.
Yep.
And it was fun to find them and kill them.
Yep, it was.
And you know what? I think there should be a sniper rifle on Face. It's the standard. The other thing that they talked about in the live stream that was kind of interesting was they're already thinking about UI. And Joe Wilcox was actually talking about U-Windows.
Yeah.
You know, we really haven't seen anything even remotely close to that since UT99. It's kind of always been a little bit of a rumble in the community that the interface is too console-like. And it sounds like that they're completely willing to go the full 9 yards this time and make a super advanced interface.
Yeah, and I hope they will, but I will caveat that by saying that, in my opinion, Windows was overcomplicated and complex interface that didn't actually have all the benefits that people think that it have. Like, I think a lot of people think about Windows nostalgically. It was cool to have these floating windows around on the screen and being able to move things around. But when you really think about what you used in the game, whenever you started it up, you had to go up to the play button and go down to multiplayer game and have the server browser pop up, and that's all you ever dealt with from that point on. I mean, once you had your settings all configured and everything, the opportunities for you to have a whole bunch of windows open in there was really limited. Yep. So when people are saying that they want Windows back, what I hear personally is that they want more of the flexibility that Windows offered in getting to different areas of the menu system than what UT 2003 on provide, and especially UT3, where it feels like you go through all these menus, but you still never find the settings that you think that should be there. Right. And half of the time it's because they aren't there. The only way you can access them is in the INI.
Right. I really think it comes down to the flexibility. So one of the games that I've been playing a lot lately, since UT3 kind of died, was PlanetSide. And one of the interesting things that happens in PlanetSide is at any time in the game, if you press right Alt, it will give you a mouse cursor and you can start clicking around on certain things. Mm-hmm. So like you can go and type in the chat box and expand the chat box and go into different rooms like your squad and your outfit and whatnot like that. And that's the sort of something that I think might be useful in UT. Something that always drove me nuts was that there was a couple of menus when you were in a match that you had to use every time, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to map vote, for instance.
Yeah.
There was certain different information screens and things like that. It was kind of like I had to press escape and then I never remembered what tab it was on, so I had to keep pressing all the tabs, or I had to find the button for the map vote. Wouldn't it be nice if all I had to do was press Alt and whatever I had rearranged before there just showed up? So I could have over here, I could have my server browser, and over here I could have my map vote window. Possibly I have the ability to set up desktops so that I could switch between different tabs that I had set up instead of having to drill through this endless myriad of tabs and stuff to find the thing that I wanted.
Yeah.
Another thing that I really hope that they focus on is not necessarily, how the interface works, but what options are actually available to you. This has been a huge problem that we have brought up time and time again since the very beginning. And it was particularly bad in UT3. The default settings and what was available to you was useless.
Yeah.
We just this week, we were picking up UT3 and people pointed out on the forum, I was like, oh, that's why I'm doing so poorly. Because there's actually a setting with the default settings where your X axis and your Y axis have different sensitivities.
Yeah.
You had to go into the INI file to remove the landing shake and the view
crosshair bob, yeah.
You had to do all sorts of really bizarre trickery to get a custom crosshair, and it was very limited in what kind of custom crosshair you could get. And the end result of it was that to make the game playable, from my perspective and from most competitive players' perspective, required a lot of tweaking that I often had to go into the INI file to do. In UT3, there was all of these buttons in the advanced graphics menu so I could turn off all of the stupid visual effects, and half those buttons, I didn't even know what they did, but then the things that I actually did want to change, I couldn't get to them.
Yep, exactly.
Those things need to be front and center, and not only that, but the settings that are going to be useful to players possibly should be defaults.
Yep.
Probably should have view bob on, but it should be in a very obvious place where people can turn it off, because I think that a lot of players don't realize the advantage that turning it off gives you.
It's kind of funny because when we made our first strafe test from the first-person view, but in 2K4 you could see how the crosshair bobbed up and down while you were moving, and I showed that to Jim Brown, and he showed it around over at Epic, and their kind of response was that they couldn't stop laughing about it and asking themselves whose stupid idea was it to add that view bobbing in there. While it adds a little bit of interesting visual effect, it's visual clutter that kind of messes up the way that you play the game. Having all the settings available is a huge thing. And part of that was in previous games, there was the preferences menu and you could get to all of the advanced settings from there. That would be a good thing to bring back. So another thing I'd say too, though, on the HUD thing is that something that people missed, even in UT, was in Unreal, you could choose between all of these HUD options, and they all had different
you could like turn
sizes and
on
scales of different icons. Like your health could be a plus that the color changed on, or it could be a number, or it could be whatever. And the same was true of the weapons and everything else. So one thing when I was playing 2K3 competitively that I always wished for was that you could get all those weapon icons out of the way and still know how much ammo there was.
Yes.
And that's something that you could do in Unreal. You could have basically a little box that just had meters of how much ammo different guns had. It was a really small thing.
The information that was displayed on the HUD in past games was spot on. I need to see my health. I need to know how much ammo I have for each weapon, so on and so forth. But the way that those were displayed in some instances was lackluster.
Yeah.
I want to see as much of the game as possible, and I want the HUD to be as out of the way as possible.
Yep.
So if I can make those smaller, great. If I can change those bars so that I can tell more easily how much of it I actually have, that's good. So it's really more in the how the information is displayed rather than it is what information to display. So this gets into the visual clarity. You need to sit down and say, what is the thing that the player actually needs to be paying attention to, and make the visual style highlight that. And that means characters need to stand out. Pathways that you can actually walk on need to be clear. That there shouldn't be things that are impeding your movement or that you're getting stuck on, unless the player can clearly see that that's going to impede their movement. That's what's going to make the big difference with the visual clarity. There was this really great video that they posted in that thread that was for League of Legends, where the developers for League of Legends were talking about all of the things that they were doing to that map to improve the visual clarity on it. A lot of it was, okay, we had a detail here, and that detail prevented players from seeing where they could actually walk.
Yeah.
So we just changed it, to make it that edge more clear.
Yeah.
And it's really every element needs to be looked at, and it's the whole thing. It's not just the detail or any one individual element.
Yep.
So there was another comment we wanted to address from Rage. He said, quote, UT was my first game I played serious online, and I was there. The reason it was more successful was because there wasn't many options to choose from. UT and Quake were the two games everyone on the planet was talking about and where the cheese was at. When 2K3 came out, there were already numerous other options people divided into. Thinking about it, it was a better time, way less options, way bigger communities, and communities that thrived. It's not interchangeable to today's time. Now, I think you have a really great point. There's always this argument about, well, UT 2004 wasn't as successful as UT 99, so we should use the UT 99 movement versus the UT 2004 movement, right? The problem with that is that we can't really conclusively prove why one game was successful and why one game wasn't.
Yep.
UT 2003 had a lot of problems besides just the movement. And like you mentioned, there was other external factors that were going on at the time too. I can't prove why one game was successful and why one game wasn't. All I can do is provide my personal experience. And my personal experience was this. UT 2003 was coming out. Mark Rain was a really good PR guy, and despite this whole flub with the 2 weeks fiasco, everybody was really excited to play this game. It was the most anticipated game coming out at that time. When the demo was finally released, even though the hype had died down somewhat, everybody was playing it.
Yep.
That first day, I remember there being 8,000 people playing the demo right away. I remember the internet being a little bit slower because everybody was downloading this huge demo that was quite big for the time.
Yeah, and people did a study on that too and said that it had slowed down the internet at least half.
And then what happened? They played it and they hated it. And within a week, they all disappeared and never came back. So that's where I come in and I can say, you know what? There was something about that game that people didn't like, and we need to avoid doing those things in the future. Now, there was a lot of things like that, so I can't just blame it on Dodge Jump. There was some bugs with it. There was the visual style. All of these things come together, right? But there's a lesson to be learned there. Is the type of player that only enjoys the UT99 movement, are there more of those out there than the UT 2004 players? I don't know. Most of the people that are around now remember 2004 and not UT99.
Yep.
But that's still a lesson that I don't think we can ignore.
Right. Well, and it's hard too because most of the people that came into the series that are really active in the community right now either came in with UT99 and they keep playing that game because that's what they enjoy, or they came in with 2K4 and they keep playing that game. And most of the people that are active in the community right now started with one of those two games. And it's really difficult to talk to people that are still playing UT about UT 2003 because they never moved on to that game. And it's really hard to talk to people that started in 2K4 because they don't have the context of the way things went into 2K3. They only have the context of the things they tried to fix in 2K4. And so there's only a very small segment of the community that can actually objectively discuss the progression of the series from UT to UT 2003 to UT 2004 to UT3. And because of that, I think a lot of the people that can talk about that whole range are not necessarily ignored, but their opinions aren't viewed favorably because people tend to lock themselves into the game that they prefer. So there's the people that love UT.
I mean, it's conflicting. For a person like me, it's conflicting because you have to realize my opinion has changed, right?
Yep.
I used to be all about Dodge Jump.
Yep.
I remember a lot of the comments that I see on the forums now about how, you know, what's the point if there's nothing different about it? And I made those arguments, and then I went through that path and decided I was dead wrong.
Well, and we haven't just done it once. We've done it three times
now.
Because, you know, we did it when 2K3 was coming out.
Right.
And we had the exact same problem. Like, here's the thing. When every game came out, when 2K3 came out, we loved it. And we thought that it was the best thing since sliced bread. And there was a huge segment of the community that absolutely hated it.
We were very much the minority. I mean, Beyond Unreal went from a community of hundreds and hundreds of people to a community of a couple of dozen people arguing in off topic and like 6 to 12 people playing CTF and UT2K3. Well, I mean, it really was a huge change.
We discussed all the problems that 2K3 had, and we got a bunch of things changed, and then a bunch of the people that liked 2K3 left at that point. As we learned more about 2K4 when it first came out, we loved it. We thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And then when UT3 came out at first, we loved it. We thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And then we found all of these issues that didn't even stem from gameplay this time. It was not even the UI was functional. Not even the server browser was functional. You couldn't even really play custom content. And there were so many problems, it was hard to even evaluate the gameplay itself.
Some of these games have conflicting lessons.
Yeah.
Frankly, personal experience makes a big difference about this.
Yep.
And you can't just dismiss those. And you're going to have to look at every person's personal experience to come to a conclusion, because those experiences are important. That's those experiences that make the game successful.
Yep.
That's all we have for this week. We had a lot of good comments last week. So keep it up, guys, and we will talk to you next week.